Good evening. Welcome everyone to session 2 of our virtual learning series, Foundations in Psychedelic-Assisted Therapy for Social Workers. My name is Heidi Allen, and I'm the Associate Dean for Research and an Associate Professor at Columbia University School of Social Work. Tonight's topic is Fundamental Therapeutic Components of Psychedelic-Assisted Therapy. This learning series is brought to you by the Psychedelic Therapy Training Program at the Columbia University School of Social Work, in partnership with the Penn School of Nursing and with generous funding from the Stephen and Alexandra Cohen Foundation and the Joe and Sandy Sandberg Foundation. Thank you for joining us tonight.
And hi, everyone. I'm Brooke Stott. I am the program manager for the Psychedelic Therapy Training Program here at Columbia School of Social Work. Just a few administrative notes for this evening. As a reminder, this learning series is not intended to be a comprehensive training in providing psychedelic-assisted therapy, but to initiate dialogue and start building foundational knowledge in the field of social work. Notably, for the first time, we have a specific pharmacological drug paired with a specific therapy model under review for approval by the FDA. As social workers make up the largest segment of mental health providers in the United States, it's critical that our clients will have access to these emerging innovations in clinical practice. And also to note again, with the exception of ketamine, these therapies are not yet available in the US outside of a research setting. We're bringing you this content with the anticipated rescheduling of MDMA and psilocybin in the coming years. I'd like to introduce our moderator for this evening. Andrea Samoya-Sosa is a second-year MSW student interested in becoming a psychedelic therapist. Her bachelor's degree is in psychology, and most of her professional background has been in some type of academic research setting. Research is also something she continues to be passionate about, and in addition to becoming a psychedelic therapist, is also interested in being involved in research on psychedelics and to use that to influence positive policy change. Andrea's hope with psychedelics is to use them to heal trauma as well as ending the racist war on drugs in order to work towards a more socially just world. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to Andrea.
Thanks so much, Brooke, and thanks, Heidi, for the introductions. I am more than happy to introduce Jennifer and Aisha. Jennifer Jones, Dr. Jennifer Jones, she has her PhD, is a licensed clinical social worker, and she is a multiracial, Black, queer, fairly able-bodied, cisgender woman in her 50s living with citizenship in the US. Jennifer incorporates an economics, human rights perspective, a harm reduction framework, and Gestalt therapy principles in her work and engagement with others. For the past 2 years, Jennifer has collaborated with Aisha Mohammed to develop the Rising Caps Collective with the mission to heal the collective trauma caused by legacies of colonization, slavery, and capitalism by using expansive healing methods, including plant-based medicines. After being trained in MDMA-assisted therapy in 2019, Jennifer began working with the Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Studies as a Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion consultant and MDMA-assisted therapy training assistant. Since 1998, Jennifer has worked with individuals in psychotherapy who identify as LGBTQA, transgender, or gender non-binary, people of color, sex workers, substance users, struggling with class oppression, living with a positive HIV status, and or healing from physical, sexual, and or emotional pain. In addition to supporting people in therapy, Jennifer has served as the Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer of Philadelphia Fight Community Health Centers and a faculty member and the executive director of the Gestalt Therapy Training Institute of Philadelphia. She earned her undergraduate degree from Northwestern University, her MSW from Smith College School for Social Work, and her PhD from Bryn Mawr College Graduate School of Social Work and Social Research. As a parent of a teenager and someone who believes a just world is possible, Jennifer is committed to organizing across color lines, creating unity among poor and dispossessed people around the world to fight for all of our economic human rights. And Aisha Mohammed, LMFT, is a cisgender queer Pakistani American woman who immigrated from Karachi to Los Angeles as a child. She has been working in harm reduction for a decade with Project Safe, providing direct services and advocating for the human and labor rights of people who trade, sex, and use substances. Aisha trained as a family therapist at Drexel University and has worked primarily with low-income families of color, immigrants, and people who use substances in community mental health and educational settings. So thank you guys, and I'll pass it over to you two now.
Thank you, Andrea. Appreciate it. I appreciate you reading our bios because Aisha and I like to start all of our work with our social locations. We see it as a really important way to get to know people and for them to get to know us. So I'm excited that you actually did that for us. And so we can start our presentation right off.
So this presentation, we will use the word client to refer to the person receiving psychedelic-assisted therapy, because we believe that any of us could be in that role, and we're not distinguishing ourselves from the people who engage in PAT as a means of healing.
So psychedelic-assisted work has the potential and has been shown to be able to support people in getting to the core of relational and existential pain that they may otherwise struggle to access. So people who may have been in therapy before, using talk therapy methods, maybe even using somatic methods, maybe even using methods such as EMDR or hypnosis, may struggle to get access to certain material that they're trying to reach and work through. It's been indicated through research to support people dealing with treatment-resistant depression, PTSD, anxiety, fears related to terminal illness. And on one hand, we might feel that easily psychedelic-assisted therapy has the potential actually to support everyone. But Aisha and I are primarily going to talk about what's been indicated in the research. So as I said, that if somebody is finding that they have traumatic history that they have not been able to quite process or access in talk therapy or using certain other techniques, what has been shown, particularly with MDMA assisted therapy, is that people have been able to access trauma. So that is somebody who we often might think of as potentially benefiting from a psychedelic assisted therapy. Someone who potentially has somatic symptoms such as panic attacks or keeps having certain kinds of somatic illnesses, particularly GI issues that may not have a diagnosis or have a somatic related diagnosis with GI issues, may also benefit from doing psychedelic at work because they may not be accessing what it is that's causing the panic. It's also been shown, particularly used with psilocybin, to work with people with end-of-life concerns, either because they have fear of dying or just dealing with the pain of their chronic illness. And so people have found that people, when they have either existential pain or spiritual pain or struggling with end-of-life care, that psilocybin has been known to be really supportive of that. And often when we talk about existential pain, we're talking about people who just have a sense of, I shouldn't exist. There's no sense of feeling at home anywhere, and a sense of, as I said, a fear of dying for people who have chronic illness or a terminal illness. It's also been shown to be supportive of folks who have attachment injuries early on or early trauma that impacts how they see themselves, how they see the world, feeling safe in the world, feeling safe with others, and feeling a sense of not being lovable or worthy. And so there has been work that has been done with MDMA, also with other psychedelics that give people a sense of of love, of connection, of working through pain that they had that caused those injuries early on. And then also for people who've experienced treatment-resistant depression, people who've used antidepressants and have not felt their depression alleviated, or have not felt that therapy was useful for them, have also found that things like ketamine have been really useful for depression, or psilocybin as well. Also, anxiety, grief, or sadness that feels connected beyond oneself. So, so much work now has been done on intergenerational trauma and ancestral trauma. And often people feel like it's very difficult to access that grief or sadness that they might be carrying. And the use of psychedelics have been found to be very useful in that.
So just some considerations for PAT. Most research study samples have excluded people diagnosed with active psychosis or personality disorder or bipolar disorder. And because of these exclusions, we don't know what the impact of PAT may be on people diagnosed with these conditions. So issues of safety may come up with clients. So PAT may not be a good fit. Hopefully once there's approval for some of these medicines, there may be more research done with other populations that could give us more information about whether it would be appropriate. People who have experienced suicidal ideation can participate in this work with additional supports put in place, especially after the medicine session, which we'll talk about in a bit, which can cause, for some people, temporary destabilization. As Jen was saying, the clinical issue being addressed can help us choose which medicine to use. So MDMA can be really useful for PTSD or attachment traumas, ketamine for depression and addictive behaviors, psilocybin for depression and end-of-life care. It's also really crucial that the client has enough social and environmental stability to be able to integrate the experience. We want to make sure that people have access to family, friends, community members, a therapist. It's important for people to have other people to talk about the experience with, in terms of being able to integrate beyond what the psychedelic-assisted therapy is offering. It's also really important that clients have a safe and stable place to land after the session so that they have enough time to rest and recover. And then it's also really important that clients are aware that the work can be temporarily destabilizing, and that they may feel worse before they feel better. It's useful to keep in mind that this is sometimes part of the process and that people do come out of it. And this is also where supports come into play, and the space to take some time off. We often encourage people with children, for example, to set up extra childcare support so that they can have some downtime to sleep, reflect, and integrate the session. We also suggest that people do restful and meditative activities such as journaling, going for walks, playing music. So having the time to do that after a session is really important. In terms of structure, this is a general structure for doing medicine work. But before we go into detail about what each type of session entails, we wanted to talk about psychological safety and the therapeutic use of touch, because these components are a fundamental part of all the sessions. So the 4 types of sessions that we'll talk more about in detail are consultation or screening sessions, preparation sessions, experiential or medicine sessions, and integration sessions. And most PAT has some form of each of these 4 phases or sessions.
So before we get into just what the components are of each of those sessions, we want to talk a little bit about creating psychological safety, because creating psychological safety is actually a part of every component from the minute you meet somebody through their work. And when we talk about psychological safety, we're talking about creating a therapeutic environment, which many of you may have heard in terms of thinking about set and setting when doing psychedelic work. And we believe that creating that therapeutic environment that feels safe is one that allows people to feel welcomed. It supports them in feeling included, feeling seen, attuned to, and supported. And so we'll talk a little bit as we get into the different components of each type of session, how we create psychological safety along the way. But there's some general things that we think are important in creating psychological safety. One is really giving the person a sense of safety, just knowing that safety and that psychological safety is really key actually to the effectiveness of psychedelic therapy. So the idea is that it's not just the psychedelic that actually supports people in their healing, but it's actually all of the treatment that actually altogether that really supports people's healing. So creating that safety with somebody in the therapeutic relationship, in the environment in which you're doing the work, is key actually to it being effective. And as I said, we begin this process from the minute we meet people through the work that they do and integrating the work that they do. And so one of the first ways that we try to create psychological safety is attuning to social location, which is why I said that Aisha and I actually start our work with naming our own social location, so that we're providing some transparency of who we are and what we bring to the space and what some of our influences are. And then we really suggest that people explore what might be the differences between our social locations and theirs. And we really recommend that therapists do that because obviously when you're in the position of being the therapist, you hold some power and privilege in the relationship. And so how the person is seeing you, whether they're reading your social location accurately or not, is important to kind of talk about so that you're creating safety in the relationship. And talking about the ways in which the different social locations that you hold impact each other. And that can be even if you think that you're holding the same social location, whether it be around race or gender, or class, or it's important to be able to talk about these things because of the intersections of identity. And so it's important to actually, even if Aisha and I are working with somebody who also has an immigrant status, obviously the different immigrant stories make a difference. Or if we're working with somebody who identifies as Black, we talk about our differences in our social locations and our experiences and how that impacts each other. Sometimes that adds to the sense of safety, and sometimes it also can bring up other concerns that people have had based on experiences that they've had with people. So I think it's important that we talk about the ways in which our social locations impact each other. The other thing that we want to make clear is that how we show up can be it impacts people even greater when they're expanded. People, when they are using in an altered state or expanded, are much more open and tuned into what's happening with other people in addition to themselves. So it's really important that we actually are clear and self-aware of what's happening for ourselves as well. So, using time either in preparation to the work, during the medicine session, and then in integration to check out people's projections and any transference that they have with us is really important. And particularly if you're working with a medicine like MDMA that's very heart opening, that works to release, it also releases oxytocin. it really does build the bond, and the potential for transference is even greater. And so I think we believe it's really important that therapists explore those things and be aware of the relational dynamics. It's also important that we be very clear about what our own projections are, how we might be experiencing countertransference with a client, because people pick up on those things. And when they're expanded, you want to try to create a space where everybody is owning their own projections, particularly you as the therapist, so that the person is not feeling confused or unclear about what is theirs and what is yours. It also then opens up the possibility for ruptures in the relationship, and the potential is greater because of the fact that there's such openness and there's such a quickness to potentially project or to have transferences. So it's really important in terms of creating psychological safety, that in preparation, there's discussion about the fact that ruptures are possible, that the therapist may let the person down in some way. They may miss something that the person is needing while they're expanded. And it's really important to ask the person to commit to that both the therapist and the participant and the client, that they agree to participate in a process of repair if a rupture does happen. So that one, it normalizes that ruptures do happen, and two, it says that we're committed to working on the relationship, which creates a level of safety.
So therapeutic touch is also a really important part of creating psychological safety. We let clients know that we're going to be discussing it in every phase of the work. So in the preparation, the medicine session, and the integration. And we're really explicit with clients that we're not offering sexual touch. And we feel that it's really important for the client's mind and body to hear that from us. In the preparation session, we talk about what we mean when we say therapeutic touch. So we talk about what kinds of touch we're comfortable offering. That might include things like holding hands, applying light pressure on limbs, a hug. And we check in with the client about what they're comfortable receiving and asking for. We also explain to clients what we use therapeutic touch for. So we found that it's supportive to people for settling into the medicine as the medicine is coming on, especially if people are feeling a lot of anxiety or agitation in their bodies. It can help people settle in. It can also help people stay with difficult material as it comes up. And to stay connected with their bodies, because so much of this work is somatic. It's also really important that therapists not assume a client's level of comfort or discomfort with touch. So for example, if you're working with a Muslim client, we don't want to assume that they wouldn't be comfortable receiving any touch. We want to check in with them and see where they're at. And just using their preparation session as an opportunity to explore what cultural messages they may be bringing with them around touch. Also what they may have learned from being in Western psychotherapy around touch and discomfort around that. And then also understanding from them what types of therapeutic touch may feel useful. So someone might say, like, anyone touching my arms, but I'm okay with someone holding my feet. So those kinds of conversations are really useful in the preparation session. And then when in the medicine session, we also check in with people about touch again before we give people the medicine. And then also in the integration session, we check in with people about how the touch was for them. So they have many opportunities to talk with us about that experience.
Yeah, so if we think about the first step in getting to know and build the relationship, it's in consultation and screening with people just to see if it makes sense to move forward with psychedelic-assisted therapy with somebody. So as I said, we introduce ourselves with our social locations. We encourage people to do so. so that people know that we talk about race, we talk about identity, we talk about gender, we talk about class, religion, where somebody was born. We talk about their immigration stories and ancestral history. So we make that apparent very early on that we are open to those kinds of conversations. And we really encourage people to talk about what are they bringing to the work? What is it that they're looking for? What do they know about psychedelics? What are they expecting from psychedelic assisted therapy? So we want to make sure that we're making sure that they have realistic expectations, particularly that one session with a psychedelic is often not enough. It's a starting point. It's really often people getting used to the experience of the medicine itself, but that it takes multiple sessions often to really get at the work that needs to be done, and that it's an ongoing relationship that we're building with them. And so we really do try to explore what do they know about psychedelics. We give them resources to read, possibly videos to watch. We try to kind of, explore any misperceptions they might have and any worries they might have about psychedelic assisted therapy. And then we also really want to check out to see if they're having any medical related concerns, any illnesses, any medications that they're taking, anything that potentially could be contraindicated with using certain kinds of psychedelics. So with MDMA, there are certain contraindications in terms of cardiac issues, in terms of whether somebody is on any kind of SSRI. That would be contraindicated for using with MDMA. It's also not very useful with psilocybin as well. So usually people who are not able to get off of their SSRIs, maybe they might want to consider using ketamine or cannabis. So they're, thinking about the medication, thinking about whether they have any medical concerns is also really important for when you're screening and figuring out whether you're a good fit for that person, as well as whether what medicine, psychedelic treatment might be best for them, and also to make sure that there aren't any medical concerns that would make it contraindicated. And then talking about how you work. It's really important that you're really transparent from the beginning about the structure of the work, what the time commitment is, and also, some of the reality of that this work can, like with any trauma work, initially it can feel a bit destabilizing. People can get really opened up, and it may take some time for them to settle back in. They may need a lot of extra social support. And so really being transparent with people about that so that they can really decide if this is something they want to embark upon. So all of that is important, I think, to talk about from the very beginning. And it starts to set the tone with people of, we're going to discuss things, we're open, we'll answer any questions for you. And it really starts to build the trusting relationship.
So for the preparation session, we start with a pretty comprehensive intake that goes through people's medical histories, mental health history. We ask about at any adverse experiences that people might have had in childhood or adulthood. We ask about social supports, people's spiritual practices, the ways that they cope with stress and challenges in their lives, their relationships. We do such a comprehensive intake because we want to get a sense of what might come up during the session, so we can figure out how best to support them through that. Often in these sessions, people choose to explore past traumas, losses, injuries, accidents. So we try to get a sense of just a kind of a lay of the land for our clients. We also, in doing the intake, people often start to identify areas of their lives that they may want to look at. So it's also useful for honing in on what the intentions for the session are. We also talk about what the person might expect to feel physically and psychologically on the medicine. So, for example, with MDMA, people often experienced an increased heart rate as they're coming up on the medicine. Some people feel nausea. So we just inform people what are some of the typical things, physical symptoms that people experience. Also psychologically, emotionally. So sometimes on MDMA, people experience waves of emotion as they're coming up. Some people experience a wave of sadness or fear. So just normalizing some of these experiences and sensations that people might feel. We also discuss ways that the person has been soothed historically when they feel overwhelmed, so that we have more tools with us to support them if that happens for them in session. And then again, answer any other questions or concerns that may have come up during their preparation session. We also again, talk about the potential for feeling destabilized after the session. I know we've said this a couple of times, but it's a really key point because we really want to prepare people because it can be, people do need to be aware that they may need extra support after the session, and that also it's really important to create space if that does happen. So again, that brings in people's social supports and self-care practices that become really important after the session. And some of those could look like meditation and journaling, which we encourage both before and after. We also talk to people about how to prepare their bodies for the session to best receive the medicine. So that includes getting enough rest, following some dietary guidelines so that their bodies are just clear enough to receive the medicine. And then we also support people in setting intentions for the work. We often suggest that people form these intentions as questions for the medicine, and then also remind people that it's useful to have clear intentions for the session, but to not hold on to them too tightly, because we also want to create space for whatever needs to emerge. And then again, we discuss the use of touch in the preparation session. So we like to do these preparation sessions in person, again, to build a sense of connection with people and safety, again, so that they get a sense of who we are. We like to do the preparation sessions in the medicine space so that people also get a sense of where they'll be spending the day when they're on the medicine, and to start to get acclimated to that.
I just want to add, in terms of preparation, also for people who've experienced some kind of intergenerational trauma, if they come from a family history where their family has immigrated under duress, or if they come from a Jewish background, or if they come from a background that's experienced colonization or experienced slavery or massacres, that those things potentially could come up during in expanded states. And so we do prepare people for that possibility, and that those are things that we can talk about during the medicine session and then also during integration. But we do give people a heads up about that, the potential for that, and supporting, and that we're available to support them through that during the medicine session. So thinking about the medicine session, there's certain things before giving somebody a substance that feel worthwhile to review, even on the day of, even though it's been discussed during preparation, just because, you want to really see where the person is at the day that they come to the medicine or experiential session. So at the beginning of the session, there's a discussion about physical safety in terms of an agreement that the person will stay until the therapists feel that the person is safe enough to leave, that the person will allow the therapist to escort them if they need to get up and potentially go to the bathroom. So just at least helping them walk to the bathroom. that even when they get up off of the space that they're like, whether it's a bed or a couch or a chair, that they first, put their feet down, they allow the therapist to be next to them, they stand up slowly. So you're really attending to physical safety while the person is expanded. And then you discuss touch again. You find out, how are they feeling in this moment? Maybe 2 days ago, maybe when you had the preparation, they may feel fine about touch, but the moment they're about to be in the session with you and they're about to take a mind-altering substance, they may be anxious about it. They may be worried about it. They may have a better sense of like, this kind of touch would feel okay, this kind of touch wouldn't. So having that kind of conversation is really important. Because I think for most people, it's important that you get the consent before they actually have taken any kind of mind-altering substance for touch. And if somebody says, no, I don't want any touch, we often talk to them about the fact that sometimes, particularly with MDMA, there is a desire, but with many of the psychedelics, there is a desire for some kind of physical touch just for grounding. And so we suggest that, you may feel differently on the substance, and, we are not forcing touch on anybody, but if you change your mind, we would need your consent now while you're not altered in order to offer that touch later, or to grant that touch later if you asked for it. So I think it's really important to talk to people about touch, to get that consent prior to them taking a substance, so that you can feel comfortable that they are aware of what's available to them, and they can feel like they can trust that they're consenting also. And then we let people know that they can say no at any point, that they don't want touch. They can ask for a touch and then decide they don't want it. So we talk all about those things before they take the substance. Then there are different ways that people often work while as therapists or practitioners while people are actually using the medicine. Usually they suggest that people go inward. So people wear an eye mask, they may lay down or recline. Usually there's music that's used to help guide people through the process. And, the MDMA-assisted therapy model really pushes the notion of the idea of working with inner healing intelligence, the belief that we all as organisms have a capacity to heal ourselves, and that the medicine allows us to get in touch with that inner healing intelligence. Other methods may work more directly with the traumatic material. That includes MDMA-assisted therapy. There's also therapies using cannabis that work very directly using somatic methods to work with traumatic material. There are other models where people are mainly holding space energetically with minimal verbal interaction between the therapist and the client. And then there are models where people combine all of those things. So there may be portions of the session where the person is encouraged to go inward and really commune with the medicine, commune with their own sense of inner healing intelligence. There are times during the session where traumatic material may come up, and the therapist is actually supporting the person, either doing parts work or potentially doing somatic work, but actually working with the traumatic material, doing inner child work with the traumatic material. And then there are times where it's really working more energetically and supporting people to just really go through the process of seeing what information comes to them, really listening to their inner voice and their own inner knowledge and wisdom, and really documenting then what material comes up. Usually how we start a session is by really helping people get grounded in their body. So actually literally doing a grounding, really getting people into their breath, talking to people about what might soothe them if they start to feel some panic or worry. And then also help letting people know that the therapist will take care of themselves. so that while they're doing their internal work, they don't have to worry about the therapist, that they will actually look after themselves and take care of themselves. And we remind people that anything that comes up for them, any feelings, any parts of themselves are all welcome in the medicine space, in the experiential, so that people don't have to feel self-conscious about crying, about screaming, about going young, about bringing in parts of themselves that maybe they see as bad or not okay. You really want to make space for that and let people know that those parts are all welcome. And then while the person is processing, also therapists often record things that are shared. They can either write down the information for the person. Sometimes people actually digitally record the sessions so that people can listen to it. But people usually like to have some kind of record of either messages that they've gotten while they were expanded, conclusions that, or resolutions that they make while they're expanded, or material that they have worked through. So usually the therapist or practitioner is recording that information for the person so that it can be used and talked about during integration. At the end of the session, as the person is starting to come down and getting more grounded, you provide a snack for the person. You really don't do a lot of processing at that time. The person is still very open, so you don't want to really be directing what they are thinking. You don't want to do any interpretation of what came up. You really want to allow them to just feel whatever they're feeling and chew on what's coming up for them. And you want to just remind the person that they do, that they allow themselves to rest, that they only share with people information and with people in their lives that they want to share, like that they can keep things to themselves if they need to, that they can share as they need to, and that it was really important in the first couple days to actually not get a lot of people's interpretation of their work, so that they can really be with what has come up for them. And then we let people know that they may still feel pretty expanded for a day or so, and that they really should allow themselves to be out in nature, to go out for walks, and to allow themselves to be in that expanded state for some time.
So after the medicine session, sometimes it's the next day, sometimes it's a couple of days after, we start the integration process. We always check in with the person the next day after the medicine session via phone to see how they're feeling, if they were able to get rest, and just to check in to see if they're okay. And then in the integration session, that's the time to help people make sense of their experience, to figure out what stood out for them, what messages they received, to discuss how their experience related to the intention for their work. Sometimes it takes a bit of exploration to really understand how the material that came up for them is connected to their intention. So the discussion helps make that explicit. And it's also to help people stay connected to their experience, to that expanded state for as long as possible. Some practitioners or therapists like to bring the client back into the medicine space to help them reconnect with the experience. Just being in that environment can jog people's memory. And sometimes people use music, the music that they play during the session, to also help people reconnect with that expansive state. We also talk about resolutions that the person has made as a result of what came up for them in the session, about any changes or shifts they want to make, and then think about how to bring about those changes that they identified during the medicine session, and also to support the person in doing more what feels good for them. And then in general, we want to get a sense from them how they're just feeling about the experience, whether there are any parts of the experience that they're feeling resistance towards or that they found challenging, so that we can support them in making sense of those experiences as well, and to go towards them and work through them. And integration is also a time to start planning for the next session and to see what else they may want to explore in future sessions as well.
I think also, just before we go to self-care, just thinking about integration too, so much material can come up that might feel overwhelming. People may talk to their ancestors. They may float back to experiences that are out of their lived experience. And it's really important to just normalize that for the person and help them figure out what they feel like the meaning is that they want to take from it. Because I think that we don't have a lot of models for people to feel like they can get in touch with those things without thinking somehow that they are having a moment of psychosis or struggling. And so I think it's really important that people know that that's a normal state in when you're altered, that we defy time and we defy space, and that we are energetically connected to energies that are beyond ourselves. And I think that that's why it's really important, actually, that practitioners, therapists do their own work, because I think that it's important that you have a sense of what it's like to be expanded and to see the possibilities of what an experience with psychedelics can be, so that you actually have a sense of like, oh, sure, the person is feeling like they're a cat right now, and they're picking up on cat energy. And that's not them being psychotic. It's them being actually open to energetic experiences that they may not have been when they're not expanded. And so I think it's really important that that practitioners and therapists have their own experiences of being expanded, so that they're aware that the things that the people are experiencing is usually bringing them information that can be useful to them. And the work of integration is really helping them get in touch with that. So then after the session, it's also important for the therapist or practitioner to take care of themselves, because you have just been sitting with somebody for 6 to 8 hours while they are in an altered state. And you are also ending up being in a very meditative state with them, which often makes you very energetically open, which can lend itself for some vicarious trauma if somebody is doing some traumatic processing. And so it's really important that you do your own, have your own practices and rituals to help you decompress. And that can include, taking a shower, going for a walk, eating nourishing food, doing self-Reiki, journaling, reading a fun novel or watching a movie, and spending time with loved ones. It's really important that you take care of yourself and debrief in the ways that you can. One of the things that also is really important is that you debrief and reflect on what the experience that you had, because you sometimes people actually go deeply into their trauma, and it's almost as if you are bearing witness and holding space for the traumatic event happening right in front of you. And that, there's a level of vicarious trauma that can happen from listening to somebody talk about their trauma. And there's a level of vicarious trauma that when somebody gets not only into the somatic experience, but also is going through the traumatic experience, it's very heavy to hold. The beauty of the work is that often people then move to the other side of the trauma and experience themselves in a different way after working through the trauma, because they are able to see the trauma from a fuller perspective. But it's still heavy to hold. Or if somebody floats back to slavery, or they float back to some colonization or massacre, or just the pain of immigration, that's heavy to hold. And it's really important that we do what we need to take care of ourselves. So, when we think about debriefing, it may be that you journal yourself or you talk to somebody. about what worked in the session, what might you have done differently, what parts of the session felt activating to you, what was rubbing up on your own experiences, were there any countertransference experiences coming up, how was it for you to hold the transference of the abandoning mother, or holding the experience of being the perpetrator who hurt a child. How was that for you? How are you tolerating that? What do you do with that? So it's really important that you seek out consultation and get support. Aisha and I strongly advocate for dyadic work, working as a therapist pair, and that's also used in the model with MDMA assisted therapy. But we use that even with ketamine or psilocybin or cannabis, because there's some safety that is created for the client in terms of the sense of they're not alone, they're with more than one person, there's support there for them from multiple people with different gifts, different styles of being. It allows for different kinds of transference when there are two people there. And then it also can really help the therapist if some countertransference is coming up in the therapist. There's another person there to support them to stay grounded. There's also someone there to debrief with. You're not holding all of this pain or anger or grief all by yourself. So in our minds, that we see the dyadic work as being really useful for both the clinician and for the client. It may not be something that's going to be easily fit into the capitalist model, but it is something that I think can be very beneficial to people and very supportive to people. So I think that that's the end of our presentation. We are really open to hearing questions and reflections and concerns, and yeah, we welcome it all. All parts of people listening are welcome.
Well, that was a really great lesson. Thank you guys so much again. And thanks for the slides too. It was really great being able to follow along like that. So the way that this will work is I'll just read a question from the Q&A, and then either of you guys can answer it. So the first question we have here is, can you tell us more about the protocols if a client should feel destabilized and not want to continue?
Not want to continue, like as in have another session. Certainly, if somebody feels destabilized, it would all depend on what we mean by destabilized. We provide, I think, enough support such that we do enough kind of screening. We've never had anybody destabilized to the point of needing hospitalization. Usually we make sure that they have community support. But if there were somebody who were actively suicidal and they didn't have community support, I don't know that I would recommend doing it with anybody who doesn't have community support. But if there were a situation where they felt like they could not keep themselves safe, then I think it would be important to use similar protocols that you would use with anybody who is struggling to stay safe in terms of hospitalization. But that would not be our first step. Like, we really would want to support somebody in feeling wrapped around and really reminding people that they will settle. Like, for some people, they get activated for a day or so, but they do settle. So we really do also try to remind people that they will come back to them, a sense of feeling like they're okay. But certainly if somebody decided that they feel like it's too much for them, then we would just support them in that. And we would support them in continuing to integrate. We really recommend that people stay in traditional therapy of some sort or some kind of healing work, even while they're doing this work. So they have other supports. And so I think that we would really recommend that they keep chewing on the work that came up with the therapist that they're working with, or they could keep integrating with us. And over time, they may decide that they want to continue the work or they may not. Psychedelics aren't necessarily for everyone, but I think that the more support people get on the front end and the stronger the therapeutic relationship, people are able to really tolerate that sense of it feeling uncomfortable initially. And we certainly have had people slow it down. Like we may have scheduled a second session and they're like, you know what, I feel like I need a little more time to chew on this. And we're like, great. Like, let's pick another date that's further along so that people really listen to themselves and listen to what they need. Which I don't know if you have more.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that sometimes people, it can be helpful to move energy for people because this work is so somatic. So we might suggest body work. So for people to get a massage or Reiki after the session, a few days after the session to help move any energy that still might be stuck in their bodies. So that can be useful too for people as they're recovering from a session.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. Our next question is, in what ways do the therapist and client create a comfortable setting? Are clients free to walk outside or throughout the clinic?
We don't work in a clinic environment. We create a more kind of home kind of environment that feels very comfortable. There is an outdoor space. If somebody wanted to go out in an outdoor space, that we would support them in doing that. It has been our experience that even when somebody thinks that they might want to go for a walk or they might want to be active during the session, they have no capacity or interest when they're doing their work to actually do so. So I know that most people's experiences recreationally might be that they're very active. They may go out for a walk on psilocybin. They may do they might dance on MDMA. They may party with ketamine. That is not usually people's experience when they're doing this kind of therapeutic work. We're not opposed to somebody stretching or moving as long as we're able to make sure that they are physically able to hold themselves up, which often when they're ready to do that, they are. But for the most part, people are not actually interested in moving. They are doing deep internal work and they don't seem to have the energy actually to go out for walks and do those kinds of things.
We also help people feel comfortable by asking them to bring objects that are soothing for them or reminders of people in their lives that are loving or caring for them. So people will create a little altar for people to put up photos, objects. So that can be a source of comfort too. We've had people, read notes that their partner members wrote for them during the session, look at photo albums. So we encourage people to think about objects to bring for the session as supports.
And that's a good point too, because we do put a lot of thought into the actual physical space. One, you want to make sure that it's physically safe. People aren't going to trip over things, but you also want to make sure that it's a space that is going to feel welcoming and inclusive of all people. So we keep our space pretty neutral. We have plants. We have windows, so there's sunlight coming in. We really don't have any kind of symbols. We don't have appropriative art. We work really hard to have it be a space that feels warm and welcoming, but does not potentially make people feel particularly, that just is not appropriative and doesn't make people feel like we are not being inclusive in the ways that we build a space. And we also, I think I lost my thought. I'll let it go on to the next question. So thank you.
Our next question is, how would the treatment context / goal of the client shape their intention set in the preparation session, e.g. intention for MDMA for PTSD versus ketamine for depression? Would facilitator help client with intention setting in any way?
Yeah, like I think with MDMA, if someone wanted to work on a specific trauma in their life, an intention might be, how just exploring how that trauma is showing up for them, what parts is it activating, maybe having an intention to work with a particular part. So maybe they haven't been able to access their anger, or there's a lot of shame. So setting an intention around working with the part of themselves that holds the shame, or the part of themselves that holds the anger. Maybe a question might be, what is blocking them from accessing that part, or from accessing the anger? So it really depends on it really depends. It varies from client to client, but we often do set intentions. MDMA is really useful for doing work with people's parts. So often the intentions draw on that, our intentions to work with a particular part.
And for ketamine around depression, if somebody found that they just are not, enjoying life, that they feel stilted in some kind of way, they feel stuck in their lives, ketamine can be really useful for people who feel like they just can't seem to muster any motivation to make shifts in their lives. We encourage people to think about what are some of their blocks to having more energy, or to being able to make some of the shifts that they want. We encourage people to see what it is that they, what else might be available to them in their lives, because ketamine is a psychedelic that it's kind of dissociative, and it very much gives you a strong psychedelic experience potentially. And for some people, it can feel very spiritual, which really, for somebody who is existentially feeling like they can't tap into what might be positive in life, it can be really helpful to have an experience of awe, an experience of something bigger than themselves. And ketamine can sometimes offer that experience. So we encourage people to, one, think about, questions about what might be their blocks. Questions might be, what else is out there for me? What is available in my life? What are some things that I actually could feel supported by in my life? And so we definitely, in preparation, talk about questions and intention.
Our next question is, what are the decolonizing implications for the psychedelic-assisted therapy space, as cultures have been historically marginalized and brutalized for this healing format, but now it is gaining legalization in the US? Isn't psychedelic a whitewashed word in itself, and how can we change language and colloquial terms for PAT to be more honorary of cultures who have used this for millennia despite the backlash?
I think it's a point well taken. I think the person answered their own question, but I think it's a good point in terms of, for us, in the way that we work, we see ourselves as doing work that's not just clinical work, that it has spiritual implications. And I think that when talking about this work, it's important to talk about its history. We know that almost every culture has used psychedelics throughout history in some form, in terms of plants and as medicinal medicines. There isn't a culture that historically has not used plants, or particularly plants, as medicines. And I think that one of the things that Aisha and I feel very strongly about is that the proponents of psychedelic work also need to be proponents of harm reduction, and proponents of really seeing that the drug war is the same war, and that those who are seeking out medicines that are now being legalized, plants and molecules that are being legalized, are doing the same thing that people who, live in Kensington are doing with heroin. They're just trying to feel better and they're trying to support themselves. And so it is incredibly important that we understand that what we are doing using psychedelic assisted work, using molecules or using plants, is very similar to what people are doing who are being criminalized. And so when we are fighting for the legalization of psychedelics, we need to be fighting for the legalization or decriminalization of any substance in which people are just trying to survive and trying to feel better. Which I don't know if you would speak differently to that.
Just adding that we create a lot of space for people to bring in their own spiritual traditions and practices and cultural traditions. So if someone is of Nigerian descent and wants to bring in practices that are indigenous, and we create space for that too. So it's a very open and flexible space and model for people to explore different parts of themselves.
The other ways that I think we see this work as decolonizing actually is in the call for collectivity. This work actually, most people when they're doing this work really start to see how connected they are. And we really support that through encouraging not only individual models, but models of group work. So people coming back together and checking in about their work in group format. So I think that one of the ways that I think that this work actually can queer and decolonize traditional therapeutic work is by saying, no, actually, we're not going to just sit and suggest that these are individualized problems. These are actually collective concerns, and that we're going to support people in coming together to talk about their collective concerns and to support each other in healing.
Next question is, thinking about all parts being welcomed, how do therapists handle mandated reporting in a case something that would require that reporting comes up?
Well, I think it's similar to how someone chooses to work as a therapist. When I was primarily doing private practice, when I think about mandated reporting, I work with a person as a human being. So I'm talking to them about the fact that, even before their work, we get deep into their work, that this is something that I am a part, as a licensed clinical social worker, I am a mandated reporter. So we're talking about that ahead of time. If they tell me that they're hurting an elderly parent or they're hurting a child, we're talking about what's going on. We're talking about how are we going to get supports in place? How are we going to support the family in doing that? And what does it mean for me to be a mandated reporter and be in relationship with them? It has not been our experience that we have had anybody come forward around things that they have done to other people in their work that we have had to think about ourselves as mandated reporters. But I think I would treat it as I would as a therapist, that I'm in relationship with that person. I'm also a part of a society that believes in trying to protect people. So figuring out how do we stay in relationship and also get them the supports that they need so that the people around them can also be protected.
Once under the med or medicine, how long does the experience last?
Depends on the medicine. We block out 8 to 9 hours, regardless of the medicine, just so that people have enough time to settle into the space. But ketamine is a shorter acting medicine, so it can be anywhere from an hour and a half to 3 hours. It also depends on if you boost a person or do another dose. MDMA sessions can be longer, 5 to 6. Same with psilocybin. So it depends on the dose and the medicine that the person is taking.
Our next question, thank you, is there a point in which the client expresses healing or resolution?
We certainly have had people feel that they have worked through things that they hadn't before. So we've had people who had some sense that they couldn't have a relationship. They weren't able to be, felt like they weren't lovable. They were pushing people away. And they, in a matter of time, have now been in relationships, and they would say that they have reached resolution around that issue. Obviously, there are always other issues. We've had people who were parents who felt like they just were not connecting with their kids, that they were keeping their kids at bay, that they were taking out all their rage out on their kids, and they found ways to channel their rage in other ways. They found ways to bring their children closer. They would feel like they were healed and had some resolution in that area of their life. Sadly, in the system that we live in, that constantly is disconnecting people from themselves, from others, and from something larger than themselves, people end up having other issues. But we, certainly have experienced people who feel like, you know what, I've gotten what I need to from this work. I have a sense of I've got myself. So many people, when they've experienced either attachment trauma or early relational trauma, lose a sense of feeling like they have themselves, like that they can take care of themselves, that they can know and tell themselves that even if my life is stressful, even if I'm, struggling with something, I've got me and I'm connected. People at the end of doing this work often at least have that. And it doesn't mean that like they don't have stressors. It doesn't mean that they don't sometimes feel depressed, but their sense of like, I actually can take care of me and I am connected to something that is bigger than me is it's profound how often that is the end result of this work.
Next question is, can they become psychotic during the session? If so, how are we able to identify that?
We haven't had anyone so far in our experience become psychotic in session. We have had a person who felt very paranoid after the session, and we supported the person's partner in supporting them. And then it was temporary. It was about a day. And then we were able to support them more in integration. So that again speaks to how important it is for people to have other supports in place, especially when they go home, people to reach out to, because we're not sure if that person would have reached out to us. Their partner actually reached out to us, so we were able to support them. But we haven't really had anyone experience psychosis in session.
Yeah, and I would argue that it's a really fine line, right? Like people sometimes do see things that they wouldn't normally see, or they may hear things that they don't normally hear. But it's also, I think most people, we don't give people doses that are like so heroic that people are like losing touch with the surroundings around them, so that most people have a sense of what is and what isn't existing. And we've never had anybody not be able to kind of tell that it's a part of a psychedelic experience or not. We also do a lot of screening early on to make sure that that people do have a sense of like if they've either used a psychedelic before, or if they've had what their family history is with psychosis. So I think you have to deal with what your comfort is in terms of taking risks. So if you are worried about somebody potentially having some psychotic experience while on the medicine, then I think it's important that you do really thorough screening and maybe not work with anybody in their early 20s or in their late teens, because you don't potentially know if they might have some psychosis, that maybe you only work with people who have ever recreationally used psychedelics, so you know that they have some sense of what it's like to be expanded. I think there are ways that if you have some discomfort or worry, that is a potential that you stay within your comfort zone and screen and work with people who you can have some comfort around and some sense that that the likelihood of them having a psychotic episode is pretty slim.
Also, set and setting goes such a long way in preventing psychosis from happening in the session. So that's part of the reason why we spend so much time in preparation to create a safe, comfortable environment for people, because that really minimizes the chances of that happening. And also building the relational container is also key for that. I think if people are feeling really held to go into that space.
Right. And the one circumstance that Aisha was talking about, the person was, we weren't aware of it until during the medicine session that they were having struggles with their partner. And so it wasn't a safe place to land. And so that probably had a significant impact on why the person actually was not feeling safe after the medicine session. We really work hard to make sure that usually that people are in a good place, that where they are landing, that they have support. And so I think that actually really was a major factor in the momentary kind of decompensation that the person was dealing with at that time. I think that in the past, when they had done sessions and their relationship was in a better place, they did not have this kind of experience after the medicine session. So,
our next question is, would psychedelics be recommended for those with the diagnosis of borderline personality disorder?
So the research often tries to screen people out who have borderline personality disorder. So there is not a lot of research that directly works with people who have borderline personality disorder. Now, certainly there are people who have not been screened out in the studies that sometimes, so there is some data, but it's not data that's looked at. It has been our experience that we have worked with people who certainly use borderline personality functioning in order to relate and to protect themselves, and we have had success with them. We often have to put a little bit of extra time in terms of creating that safety and relational container, but you really have to trust your judgment about whether somebody really whether the person can build trust with you. What we found was that when we put in the extra time with someone who I think potentially who has been given that diagnosis, or a couple people, when we put in that time, when we actually built the level of trust that we had with them, we were able to support them in even when they had moments of worrying about whether they could trust us or not, or if we had done something to upset them. And they, we got them to commit to staying with us, in terms of if we do something that doesn't feel right, that we lean into the rupture and we do the repair work. But you really have to be sure that the person has that ability to be able to look at the projections, to like own what might be theirs, to see you as a human being, and to really trust that you are there to care for them, not to hurt them. And that takes time and work. So it is our hope that once there are legalized, more, legalized psychedelics, that there'll be more research, because we do know that there's some correlation between complex PTSD and using borderline personality functioning in order to survive and relate and to protect oneself.
Our next question is, can people get re-traumatized through the medicine?
I think that if people are not well held in terms of there isn't a safe relational container, certainly people can feel re-traumatized because, and it's the same with any trauma therapy, right? Any trauma therapy where you have people go towards their traumatic material and there's not enough holding, there's not enough support for the person to be able to go to their therapeutic edge, potentially the potential for re-traumatization is there. That's why it's really important that you are making sure that you are, as a therapist, that you're creating enough safety in the relationship, that you are supporting people in really staying with their breath, staying in their body, staying grounded with you. There's also a way in which, particularly if you're doing this work with MDMA, there's less of a chance of feeling re-traumatized, that people often feel very supported internally by the medicine. But if you were to, let's say, go towards a trauma with psilocybin that doesn't necessarily give that kind of support, and the person feels very alone and paranoia comes up in them, it can feel re-traumatizing. So I think it's really important that you think about what medicines you're using, you really know the medicine that you're using, and that you really are going slow enough that you're creating enough safety with the person so that they feel like they can tell you what's coming up with that in them, and that they feel held by your support.
We only have 2 minutes left, and there's a long line of questions. But so I'm sorry we're not going to be able to get through all of them. But I just want to say thank you so much for these thoughtful responses and for all of the context and information and experience you shared today. I just could listen to you, both of you, all night talking about this work. It's so clear that you bring so much heart and compassion and skill and experience to the work. Brooke, did you have anything that you wanted to say in closing? And thank you, Andrea, for your fantastic moderation.
Oh, thank you so much. Appreciate that. Thank you guys for being here and allowing me to do this.
I will just quickly say, yeah, thank you so much. That really was remarkable. That was really well done. And thank you, Andrea, for your moderation as well. Anything else from you, Jennifer or Aisha, before we close?
I'm just grateful to have been able to speak with you all. And this is exciting work. I think it's just really important that we all get as much training, as much experience in ourselves, and keep working on ourselves. Like, if people want to do this work, this is the time to keep working on your own healing.
Yeah, and I just appreciate you all for having us here. It's always really useful to talk about the work, and we learn as we keep sharing too. So
awesome. Well,
thanks, everybody. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you all. Have a good night.